Not because it was slow. It hit 145 horsepower on straight carbs. Then the crank grenaded itself mid-ride like the machine was trying to kill itself. This happened more than once. These machines broke every rule, broke themselves, and still had riders rebuilding them in their garages just to feel that rush again. Everything you think you know about extreme snowmobiles started right here. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why Yamaha built the only four-cylinder engine in snowmobile history and then killed it without a single word of explanation. You'll hear the full, unfiltered story of the sled that pushed 145 horsepower and literally destroyed itself, proving it could. And you'll know which machines sitting on dealer floors right now in 2026 are genuinely extreme and amazing. Stay with me. Let's start in 1977, before the liquid cooling wars, before EFI, before anything. Ski-Doo builds the Blizzard. This was the first production snowmobile sold to trail riders with actual factory race hardware already built in from day one. Race-derived components. From the Ski-Doo factory, on the showroom floor, the Blizzard ran Rotax engines in 340 cubic centimeters and 440 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled configurations. The flagship Blizzard 9500, the 440LC, was producing approximately 82 horsepower in showroom trim. I know, but most fan-cooled 440 cubic centimeter production snowmobiles of that era were making 38 to 55 horsepower. The Blizzard 9500 was putting out significantly more. That gap on the trail was huge. The Blizzard's chassis was purpose-built for that power. More suspension travel than any comparable trail machine at the time. A stiffer front end. Rider ergonomics positioned for control at speed, not comfort on a casual groomed loop. The Blizzard X and Blizzard SS variants were the ones that got completely serious. The machine proved something the entire industry had been debating, that a consumer snowmobile could carry genuine race DNA without becoming impossible to own. The Blizzard line lasted into the early 1980s, and what came next was the machine that took that race philosophy and nearly killed itself, trying to prove how far it could go. The story behind it is still talked about today. 1993. Polaris has a competitive problem. Arctic Cat and Ski-Doo are both chasing 90-plus horsepower from their best trail sleds. The rivalry is fierce, and the machines are genuinely good. Polaris's answer is not to match them. It's to lap them. The Polaris Storm. It started life in 1993 as a 750 cubic centimeter three-cylinder two-stroke, carbureted. The 1993 750 was making around 130 horsepower. In 1994, the displacement went to 794 cubic centimeters, and from 1996 to 1998, dyno results on stock machines were consistently landing in the 145 to 146 horsepower range on a carbureted motor, when everyone else was celebrating 90 horsepower like it was a moon landing. The power delivery on the Storm was violent in a way that separated it completely from anything else on a groomed trail. Guys who lined up against Storm owners in northern Wisconsin or the UP in 1994 and 1995 experienced exactly one thing. They watched it disappear, but nobody knew the Storm had a catastrophic failure mode that became infamous within 2 model years. Crank failures. The 93, 94, and 96 models had these problems. The engine was producing power loads that the crank architecture was not fully engineered to sustain under extended, repeated hard riding. Motors were literally coming apart. Guys were doing preseason bottom-end teardowns as standard winter preparation. Not because the shop told them to, because they'd seen what happened when you didn't. But the riders who figured out how to keep a Storm alive, who learned the machine, who did the prep work, had the fastest carbureted trail sled in the country. And they'd rebuild it again, without hesitation, every single time. That is what extreme looks like from the inside of it. You know the risk, you accept it, because nothing else gives you what that motor gives you. By 1995 and 1997, Polaris had made meaningful improvements to the bottom end. The late production Storm machines were more durable. Quick pause right there. If you owned a Storm and rebuilt that bottom end yourself in your own garage, hit that like button. Small channel, it genuinely helps. And keep watching, because more powerful sleds are coming your way. Yamaha never did anything the same way everybody else did. And in the early 1990s, They proved it with an engine architecture that nobody in the entire history of snowmobiling had tried before, or has tried since. The Yamaha VMAX 4, the only production snowmobile ever built with a four-cylinder engine. Four cylinders, an inline configuration, two-stroke. First sold in 1992 as a 743 cubic centimeter machine, then expanded to 791 cubic centimeters for the 1995 model year, a change that pushed peak dyno output from around 128 horsepower to approximately 149 horsepower. Snowgoer named the 1992 VMAX 4 Snowmobile of the Year in its first season. They didn't hand that out for nothing. Every other major manufacturer on Earth was building inline triples. Polaris, Arctic Cat, Ski-Doo, three cylinders in a row, carbureted in roughly the same fundamental layout they'd been refining for years. Yamaha looked at that industry consensus and said no. The inline four layout produced power delivery characteristics that were completely different from a triple. More torque through the mid-range, a broader, flatter power curve. Where an inline triple built sharply toward a peak, the VMAX 4 was pulling from down low and still pulling hard at the top end. For lake racing, this was devastatingly effective. You pinned the throttle off the line, and the power was just there. Immediately, the entire run. Documented top speeds on stock 800 cubic centimeter VMAX 4 machines were touching 114 miles per hour on groomed ice. This was one of the fastest production snowmobiles of the 1990s period. The VMAX 4 dominated grassroots lake racing across the upper Midwest for the better part of a decade. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. If there was frozen water, a measured course, and a serious rider in the field, a VMAX 4 was usually in the conversation for the top spot. It was actually banned from USSA Formula 3 competition after the 1991-92 season for being too dominant. Interestingly, the four-cylinder engine package was physically wider than the triples everyone else was using. The hood profile reflected that. On a groomed trail where width mattered in tight sections, you felt the difference. The handling was notoriously loose. One snowgoer editor later joked it had more push than a fully loaded shopping cart. This was not a trail sled. It was a dedicated lake speed machine wearing a trail sled's clothing. Riders loved it. The VMAX 4 ran from 1992 through the 1997 model year. The final year, Yamaha sold a handful of units with improved rear suspension and upgraded brakes. Yamaha never updated the engine to fuel injection, never carried the four-cylinder architecture forward into a successor model. No successor, no explanation, just gone. The used market has never let it go, of course. Clean, well-maintained examples in solid running condition still pull $3,000 to $5,000, sometimes more for the coveted final 1997 production models. Before we get into modern machines, one more from the old era, one of my favorite, the Arctic Cat El Tigre EXT, specifically the extended travel variants from around 1989 into the early 1990s. Liquid-cooled 530 cubic centimeters Suzuki Spirit Twin, factory twin expansion chambers. Approximately 90 to 95 horsepower in factory tune. Context again. In the late 1980s, a liquid-cooled trail sled making 90-plus horsepower was not playing games. Most performance machines of that period were putting out 75 to 85 on a good day. The El Tigre EXT with its twin pipes was a different conversation entirely. But here's what actually made it extreme, and this part gets overlooked every time. The EXT designation stood for Extended Travel Rear Suspension. Arctic Cat built a rear end on this machine that actually managed terrain at speed instead of just absorbing it reluctantly. At a time when most trail sleds were still running limited travel rear suspensions that transferred every piece of rough trail directly into your lower back over a full day of riding, the El Tigre EXT was trying to solve a real mechanical problem. Managing what the rider felt, not just what the engine produced. That was not a universal priority in the late 1980s snowmobile industry, and Arctic Cat was doing it. The sound of a tuned El Tigre 530 at full pull on a cold-groomed trail in late January is something specific and awesome. That liquid-cooled twin with dual pipes at high RPM is a particular kind of mechanical music. Guys who rode El Tigres in the late 1980s will tell you they haven't heard anything quite like it since. They're right, guys. By the early 1990s, Arctic Cat's own ZR chassis replaced the El Tigre as their performance flagship, and the next chapter of the Cat legacy began. But the El Tigre EXT demonstrated something years before the competition caught up to it. That Arctic Cat understood the rider experience at speed, not just the horsepower number. That philosophy is why their later machines were as good as they were. All right, now let's talk about what actually qualifies as extreme on a dealer floor right now. Because the machines available in 2026 are not just incremental improvements over what we covered in the last few minutes. Some of them are genuinely shocking in what they can do. If the trail performance segment had a championship belt in 2026, Polaris would be wearing it right now. The Indy XCR 850, pure trail weapon. The XCR name has lived in the Polaris lineup since the mid-1990s. It has always been the most performance-focused configuration Polaris builds for groomed trail use. That lineage is real, and it matters. The current XCR runs the 850 Patriot engine, two-cylinder, two-stroke. Dyno results on the Patriot 850 consistently land in the 165 to 169 horsepower range, in a ready-to-ride chassis that keeps the weight competitive with anything else at this power level. That sort of combination on a groomed trail at speed is not a comfortable experience. It is an extreme one. You've got Walker Evans Velocity front shocks tuned for aggressive trail conditions, a rider forward position that puts your weight over the front skis where it needs to be at 80 miles per hour. Gripper ski geometry. At 70 miles per hour on a groomed trail, the XCR feels planted and predictable. At 90 miles per hour, it still does. The aftermarket for the Patriot 850 is already good. Clutch kits, pipe packages, ECU tuning. Experienced guys are adding meaningful horsepower with bolt-on modifications. A properly set up XCR 850 on a well-groomed trail is doing things that would have been genuinely unbelievable to anyone who rode the original 1990s XCR and would have made the original XCR riders smile anyway. Drop a comment right now. Do you think a naturally aspirated two-stroke trail sled at 165 plus horsepower is the ceiling, or has Polaris got more coming? I want to see what you think. Keep watching, because the next machine on this list is what happens when you give a crossover platform turbo power and the serious trail geometry at the same time. Most riders hear Renegade and think versatile, trail and powder. The sensible choice for someone who can't decide. The Renegade Adrenaline with the 900 Ace Turbo R changes that conversation permanently. BRP's turbocharged four-stroke in a trail-focused crossover chassis, rated at 165 horsepower. And before you compare that number to the XCR and assume it's the same machine, it's not. The four-stroke turbo power delivery is completely unlike what you get from the two-stroke Patriot. At low RPM, there's a moment of lag while the turbo builds boost. Then it arrives, and it doesn't stop. The surge builds and builds through the power band in a way that two-stroke riders experience as distinctly unsettling the first few times. Your brain expects the hit to end. It doesn't. On a groomed trail that opens into a long straight, the Renegade Adrenaline hits that boost threshold, and the machine accelerates away from you for a full half second before your inputs catch up. This is not a feeling. This is what turbocharged four-stroke torque actually feels like in your hands and in your back. The four-stroke engine means no premix, no top-end rebuild cycles every 3,000 miles, no clutch-burning two-stroke smell soaked into your gear. The maintenance intervals are longer. The power is consistent from cold start. Guys transitioning from two strokes sometimes describe it as almost too calm. Right up until they're at full throttle on a long open section, then it's not calm at all. The Rev Gen 5 chassis is decades of refinement behind it. BRP has been evolving this platform continuously since the mid-2000s. So you get a machine that handles the Turbo R's power with a poise that doesn't feel like it's working hard. This is the machine you ride all day, every day, and then open up on the right section and embarrass people who wrote it off as the practical choice. That's a specific kind of extreme, the one that surprises people. Next, at number 7 for today. For years, the serious mountain segment was essentially a two-manufacturer conversation. Polaris and Ski-Doo fought over dominance in the steep, deep terrain markets of the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, while Arctic Cat watched from the edge of the discussion. Then they built the Riot, Arctic Cat's C-Tech 2 two-stroke twin in a mountain platform. Aggressive geometry calibrated specifically for side hilling, technical tree riding, and steep chutes where the machine's weight balance relative to the rider matters more than raw horsepower. The Riot platform philosophy is different from how Polaris and Ski-Doo approach their mountain machines. The running board position, the geometry of how the machine balances between its front and rear contact points, and the track length options are all calibrated around a specific kind of mountain rider movement. Mountain guides and technical backcountry riders who've spent serious time on the Riot talk about accessing terrain that was awkward on competing platforms. Not because the Riot has more power, because the chassis communicates differently and rewards a certain style of aggressive riding. The deep powder flotation on a 163-inch Riot track in Pacific Northwest conditions is legitimate. This is not a machine copying the Summit or the RMK. It has a distinct mechanical personality. The guys who invest in learning it become genuinely annoying because they keep appearing on lines you assume were not possible on any sled. This is Arctic Cat's answer to the question of whether they still belong in the mountain conversation. The answer is yes. I want to hear two things from you guys. First, which of the classic machines on this list did you actually ride? Not own, ride, even once. The Blizzard, the Storm, the VMAX 4, the El Tigre. What do you remember about it? Second, in 2026, what do you think the most extreme snowmobile on the market actually is? Not the most expensive, the one that genuinely earns the label. Drop both in the comments. If this is the kind of honest content you're looking for, hit subscribe. Small channel. Every single subscriber matters to me. Check out the next video right here.